The wind rolled across the open fields the way it always did in late autumn, carrying the smell of drying hay and the faint hint of rain far out on the plains. The sky was sinking into a warm gold, stretching long shadows across the fence posts as the last sun rested over the quiet farm. It was the kind of land where time always felt slow, where every step carried the weight of someone who had lived here long before. Out in the silence, the faint creak of the farmhouse door echoed. And that was the moment everything changed. She had come to the farm with nothing except a small bag, worn boots, and a heart trying to stay brave. Her name was Leora, and life had pushed her from one town to another, leaving her with little more than the hope that she might find a place where she could breathe without fear. Folks on the road had told her the old farmer in the valley needed help. A quiet man, a man who paid fairly, a man who kept to himself. They never mentioned the look in his eyes or the heavy truth he carried on his shoulders. When she reached the porch, she didn't expect to see him standing there waiting. He didn't knock his cane or call out. He simply watched her with a steady gaze, his face half in shadow, half in the warm glow from the lantern inside. His shoulders were broad, even with age pressing against him. And his voice, when he finally spoke, felt like gravel that had been warmed by the sun. "You're late," he said, though not unkindly. "The wagon should have dropped you here an hour earlier." "I walked the last stretch," she answered softly. The driver said the road was too muddy to go further. He nodded, as if he already knew. His name was Thorn, a name people didn't say lightly. Anyone in the county knew him as the lone farmer, who worked land too big for one man and lived a life too heavy for most hearts. Some whispered he was stubborn. Some said he carried secrets too dark to share. But no one ever denied the respect that came with his name. Leora stepped inside the farmhouse. The wooden floor creaked, and a warmth settled around her, the kind she hadn't felt in years. The place was old, built by hands that had lived through storms, droughts, and the long nights that made frontier life feel endless. Yet something about the house felt tired, as if every wall held a story no one had dared to finish. Thorn closed the door behind her, and when she turned, she noticed the way he pressed his hand briefly against his chest. It was quick, but not quick enough for her to miss. His breathing grew shallow before he straightened again. "You'll be helping with the chores," he said. "Cooking, cleaning, tending the animals. The work isn't light, but I pay more than most." "That's all I'm looking for," she said. "A chance to work. A place to stay." Yes. His eyes stayed on her for a long moment. It wasn't the stare of a man sizing someone up. It was the stare of a man deciding something in silence, weighing a future he hadn't planned to share. She didn't understand it then, not until the night fell deeper. He showed her the small guest room, simple but clean. A warm quilt, a little window facing the fields, a table for her things. She thanked him, but he didn't respond. He only walked away, his steps slow, as if thinking over something he couldn't bring himself to say. Later. When the moon rose over the land, Leora found herself unable to sleep. She stepped outside, drawn by the soft glow of the lantern Thorn had left burning in the barn. The old man was there, standing beside his horses, brushing their coats with steady practiced strokes. His back was bare except for the scars that crossed it like old maps of battles no one else had survived. His hair was silver but thick, and even with age weighing on him, he had the strength of someone who had worked every day of his life. "You should be resting," he said without turning. "So should you," she replied, stepping closer. "You seem tired." "Work keeps me alive," he said. "It keeps me standing a little longer." His voice cracked at the end, barely noticeable, but enough for her to hear the truth beneath it. There was something he wasn't saying, something heavy. She waited, sensing that he needed to speak before his courage slipped again. He finally turned, and the lantern light cast deep lines across his face. His eyes, sharp and gray like storm clouds, locked with hers. There was no coldness in them, only a quiet sort of pain. "I brought you here for a reason," he said, steady but low. "And it's a reason you deserve to know." Leora felt her breath slow. The night went silent, except for the distant howl of a lone coyote far across the hills. Thorn stepped closer. his hand brushing the wooden stall as if grounding himself. "I went to the doctor last month," he said. "He gave me a number to count down with. 3 months. That's all he claims I have left." Our heart froze. She didn't expect the words, didn't expect the weight they carried. She had come here looking for work, not for the final truths of a dying man. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head, not in anger, but in acceptance. "I've lived long. I've built this land with these hands, but I have no family left. No blood to leave behind. And everything I've earned, everything I've fought for, will be taken by the government when I'm gone." He took another slow breath, his hand trembling just barely. "That's why I sent for someone. Not a nurse, not a worker. Someone with a quiet heart. Someone who needed a chance." Her chest tightened. She didn't know where this was going, but she felt the air shift around them. Something old and serious settling between them. Thorn stepped closer. His voice dropped to a whisper, raw and honest. "If you marry me, everything will be yours. The land, the home, the cattle, every acre I have built." Leora's breath caught. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. The night thickened around them. "You barely know me," she said. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're alone. I know you work hard. And I know this land needs someone strong to carry it forward." Seconds passed. The horses shifted quietly behind them. The cold wind brushed past her face. "And if I say yes," she asked, "what do you expect from me?" Thorn looked at her with a depth that made her heart shake. "Only that you stay by my side for whatever time I have left." The lantern flickered, casting shadows across the old barn walls. Leora stepped back, her heart pounding. She had come here for shelter, not choices that could change her whole life. Outside, thunder rumbled across the distant mountains as if warning her. This moment mattered more than she knew. She opened her mouth to answer. But just then, something moved in the darkness behind Thorn. A shadow. A figure she hadn't noticed before. Someone who had been listening. And when she realized who it was, her pulse shot through her body. Before she could speak a single word, the figure stepped out of the shadows. Boots hitting the ground with a heavy sound, Thorn stiffened. Leora froze, and the truth neither of them expected was about to come forward. The figure emerging from the shadows moved with a slow, deliberate step, the kind that made the ground feel heavier each time his boots struck the floor. The lantern hanging in the barn flickered, throwing long streaks of gold across the stranger's face. Leora felt the air in her chest lock as his outline sharpened. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, and younger than Thorn by many years. Though something in his eyes carried the same kind of weight that came from a hard life, Thorn's back straightened, and his hand tightened slightly on the edge of the stall. Leora didn't know if the tension came from surprise or from something much deeper. The stranger's voice broke the silence first, steady but carrying a sharp edge. "So this is the reason you sent for help." Thorn let out a slow breath, as if he had expected this moment but hoped it wouldn't come so soon. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I should be everywhere you try to keep secrets," the man answered. Leora stepped back instinctively, but neither of them looked at her. Their eyes stayed locked on each other, two storms waiting to break. The stranger moved closer, the lantern light finally falling fully across his face. He had the kind of strong jaw that looked carved from stone, dark eyes that watched everything at once, and a scar across his cheek that looked older than most of his years. His name came from Thorn's lips like an old wound being opened. Rylan. Rylan didn't flinch. "You didn't tell me anything. You just disappeared again." Leora could feel heat rising in her chest, the kind that came when two lives collided in a way she didn't understand yet. She hadn't even known another person lived anywhere near this farm. Thorn never mentioned a family member or a past connection. But Rylan wasn't acting like a hired hand or a traveler. There was history here, thick and heavy. Pulling the night in tighter, Thorn leaned on the stall for a moment, but he didn't let his voice shake. "I needed time. Time to think. Time to set things in place, and you brought her into it." Rylan's gaze finally shifted toward Leora, not in anger but with a kind of sharp curiosity that made her heart beat faster. "You brought a stranger into something this big. Leora swallowed hard. I didn't know anything, she said quietly. I only came here for work. Rylan didn't speak right away. He studied her as if trying to decide if she was part of the problem or part of the solution. The barn felt crowded suddenly, despite being wide enough to hold horses. Bales of hay, old tools, and years of memories. Thorn stepped forward, placing himself slightly between them. She isn't here for trouble. Rylan crossed his arms. She's here for a deal. Not yet, Leora said, her voice soft but steady. I haven't agreed to anything. Her honesty struck both men differently. Thorn looked relieved. Rylan looked slightly surprised, then pressed his lips together. You don't know what saying yes would mean, Rylan said. Not for him, and not for you. Leora lowered her eyes for a moment before lifting them again. Then maybe someone should explain. Thorn closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. When he opened them, the strength in him returned. Layered over the exhaustion carved across his features, there's more to this farm than land and cattle, he said. There's more to my time running out than the doctor's words. Rylan scoffed lightly. You should have told her the truth from the start. She just got here, Thorn said. She deserves a moment to breathe before I place the burden on her shoulders. The burden is already here, Rylan answered. Liora felt the tension tightening between them again, winding itself like rope. She didn't want to be caught between their past and their anger, but she was already too deep in it to step away. Thorn turned to her, his gaze softer now but still lined with fear. This farm has enemies, he said quietly. Old ones. Ones who want it because of what lies beneath the land. They've waited for years, thinking I'd break or give up. But I didn't, not until now. Leora felt the breath leave her lungs. She had seen hardship, but never anything like this. Who are they? She asked. Rylan stepped closer, his voice low. Folks who believe this land owes them something. Folks who lost a fight decades ago and have never forgotten it. The barn grew colder, though the lantern still glowed. Leora wrapped her arms around herself as a shiver ran through her. Why didn't you tell anyone? She whispered. Thorn gave a tired smile. I did tell someone him. Rylan's jaw tightened again. And you still went quiet all these years. Leora couldn't ignore the sharp edge hiding beneath their words. They weren't just talking about land or enemies. They were talking about a broken bond, something deeper. Thorn looked down at his hands. You were young. I didn't want your life swallowed by the same fight that swallowed mine. That wasn't your choice to make, Rylan said, though his voice cracked faintly. Leora's heart pulled at that sound. For the first time, she understood these two weren't strangers to each other. They were tied by something bigger than a farm. Something painful. Before she could speak, a sudden gust of wind rattled the barn doors. Thorn stiffened. Rylan's eyes snapped to the entrance. The horses threw their heads up, sensing something outside. Leora took a step backward. What was that? Rylan reached for the old rifle hanging on the nearby post. Not the wind, he said. Outside, footsteps scraped against gravel. Slow, heavy, purposeful. A chill crawled across Leora's spine. Thorn moved slightly in front of her. Stay close. The barn doors creaked again, and a shadow passed across the thin crack. Someone was outside. Someone who didn't care about being noticed. Rylan lifted the rifle. But Thorn raised a hand, stopping him. Not yet. The silence pressed in so tight it almost felt like breathing was wrong. Leora's fingers tightened around the edge of the stall behind her. She hadn't expected her first night on the farm to turn into something dangerous. She barely knew these men, yet she was suddenly trapped inside their world. The footsteps stopped, but the presence didn't. Rylan took one more step toward the door. If it's who I think it is, he said, we're in trouble. Thorn's expression hardened. I hoped they wouldn't come this soon, Leora whispered. Who? Thorn didn't answer. He only looked toward the door, his jaw tightening as if bracing for a blow. The barn doors shifted again, and for a moment it felt like whoever stood outside was testing whether they should enter or wait. The air was thick with the kind of fear that didn't come from wild animals or storms. This was human fear. Fear of someone who knew exactly what to take and how to hurt. Rylan edged closer to the door. They've been watching since sundown. Leora's throat tightened. Watching us. Watching him, Ryland said with a bitter tone. Thorn finally looked back at her, regret deep in his eyes. You came here for shelter, he said gently. And now you're in the center of something you never asked for. A long moment passed. The barn grew so quiet that the only sound was the restless breathing of the horses. Then the footsteps outside moved again, this time away from the door. Slow at first, then fading into the night. Ryland lowered the rifle, but his shoulders didn't relax. They'll be back, he said. They never walk away for long. Thorn nodded. I know. Leora tried to steady her breathing. Who are they exactly? Ryland and Thorn exchanged a look, the kind that spoke of years of shadows and unfinished stories. Thorn finally answered, his voice heavy. They're the ones who believe this land should belong to them. The ones who think they can take it once I'm gone. And the ones who won't stop until the farm changes hands? Leora swallowed hard. And the marriage? Thorn looked into her eyes with a truth she wasn't prepared to carry. They won't dare touch this land if it's protected by someone they fear. Someone who isn't dying. Someone stronger than they expected. Leora stepped back. You want me to stand between you and them? No, Thorn said softly. I want you to stand for yourself. And if you choose this place, this land will stand for you. Another cold gust of wind swept through the barn, making the lantern sway. Ryland looked toward the door again. We don't have much time, he said. Leora stared at Thorn, feeling the weight of the offer settle in her chest. 3 months, a marriage, a legacy, and enemies. Who waited in the dark? She opened her mouth to speak. But before a word could leave her lips, another sound rose outside. Not footsteps this time. Not someone leaving. It was the sharp crack of something. Breaking. And it came from the farmhouse. Thorn's face went still. Ryland lifted the rifle again. Leora's breath caught. The night had only just begun. And already the danger had grown closer. Too close. The sharp crack from the farmhouse window cut through the night like a warning no one wanted to hear. Leora felt her heart jump into her throat as the sound echoed over the quiet fields. Thorn stepped forward with more speed than she thought a man in his condition could manage. And Ryland was already ahead of him, rifle raised. Eyes narrowed toward the dark outline of the house. Leora followed, though every step felt heavy with dread. The air carried the faint smell of dust and cold metal, the kind that came from someone meddling with things they had no right touching. As they stepped out of the barn, the moonlight cast the farmhouse in a pale glow, revealing the broken line of shattered wood beneath one of the windows. Ryland lifted his hand, signaling them to stay back. He moved toward the house with careful steps, circling around the broken window, his jaw set tightly. Thorn stood beside Leora, his breath slower now, though he tried to steady it. This is why I didn't want you involved, he murmured. Leora swallowed. Something was already coming for you. My being here didn't change that. His eyes softened at her words, though the fear behind them only deepened. Ryland reappeared at the front door. They didn't get inside, he said. Just hit the frame. Testing the house is still the way they do things. Thorn frowned. They're trying to send a message. Ryland nodded. A message that they know she's here. Leora felt chills run through her. Why would they care about me? Ryland's gaze met hers, and in that silent moment she understood the truth. Whoever these people were, whoever wanted the land, didn't want anyone new joining Thorn's world. Anyone who might strengthen him. Anyone who might stand in their way. We need to go inside, Thorn said, before they circle back. Inside, the farmhouse felt heavier, as if the walls absorbed the danger creeping around them. The lantern on the table flickered gently, throwing long shadows across the room. Ryland checked the windows, running his hand along the frames, his expression tense. Leora stood near the doorway, her fingers twisting nervously around the fabric of her sleeve. Thorn lowered himself into the old chair by the fireplace. The flames crackled behind him, giving his face a worn look, filled with lines of long battles and quiet secrets. They've been waiting for me to fall, he said. And now that they know I'm near the end, they're growing bolder. Ryland clenched his jaw. They think 3 months is nothing. They think if they push hard enough, they'll take the land before the time runs out. Leora stepped closer. But why the land? You said there was something beneath it. Thorn stared into the fire, the glow reflecting in his eyes. There's an old vein of ore hidden beneath the west field. Silver, or something close to it. My father found traces of it decades ago. But he died before he could do anything with it. Only a few men knew about it, and they've been after it ever since. Leora felt her breath slow. So this was the root of the danger. Not just land or legacy. Wealth hidden in the soil. They believe the land should have been theirs, Ryland said. Their family worked these fields long before they gambled it away. Losing it turned them mean. Thorn nodded. And when they realized my father had discovered the ore, they let greed eat them alive. Leora tried to understand the world she had stepped into. She had never imagined a simple job on a farm would turn into a storm of old grudges and dangerous men. But as she looked at Thorn and Ryland, she knew the story went deeper still. How many of them are there? She asked. Ryland replied without hesitation. 3 brothers and whoever they pay. The eldest is the worst. His name is Crowder. Crowder. The name felt sharp even just hearing it. A name shaped by anger. A name that didn't belong anywhere near peace. Thorn rubbed his forehead with the back of his hand. I thought I could outlive them. That time would wear them down. But time didn't, Ryland said quietly. It wore you down instead. A heavy silence fell over the room. Leora felt the sting of those words, even though they weren't meant for her. Thorn didn't argue back. He simply accepted the truth, even if it broke something inside him. Ryland placed the rifle beside the door, then turned to Leora. There's more you need to know. If you stay here, you'll have to learn how to protect yourself. They won't take pity on you just because you're new. Leora straightened her shoulders, even though her stomach twisted. I didn't come here to hide. Ryland studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Good, because hiding won't keep you alive out here. Thorn let out a slow breath. No one is making choices tonight. But the danger is clear. If you want to leave, Leora, I won't blame you. Leora looked around the farmhouse at the worn wood, the steady fire, the quiet strength built into every corner, and then she looked at Thorn. His eyes were tired, but full of something she couldn't turn her back on. I'm not leaving, she said firmly. Not when someone is trying to force me to. Thorn's breath caught, and a faint spark returned to his eyes. Ryland looked at her again, this time with something closer to respect. We'll need to make changes, Ryland said. Locks, lantern posts, stronger windows, and you'll need to learn the layout of the land. If something goes wrong, running blind out here will get you hurt. Leora nodded, though fear lingered at the edges of her thoughts. I'll learn. As the night settled, Ryland moved outside to secure the perimeter. Leora helped Thorn stand and walk to his room. She noticed the weakness in his legs, the strain in his breathing, the way he held onto the wall for balance when he thought she wasn't looking. The doctor's words were real. Time was shortening. When they reached his room, he paused before entering. You shouldn't be tied to a dying man's war. You didn't choose the timing, she said softly, and I didn't choose the danger. But I did choose to stay. He looked at her with a depth that made her heart tighten. Your life shouldn't be shaped by my final months. Yeah. Maybe it won't be, she said quietly. Maybe it will be shaped by what happens next. He didn't answer. He only nodded and stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. Leora stood alone in the hallway for a long moment. Listening to the distant sound of Ryland moving outside and the quiet hum of the night wind pushing against the farmhouse walls, she walked to the front room and sat near the fireplace, staring into the flames. Her thoughts twisted in circles around the danger, around the land, around the choice she hadn't fully understood but somehow knew she had to face. A sudden knock at the door made her jump. It wasn't loud, but it was unexpected. She stood quickly and reached the doorway, just as Ryland entered, carrying a small box. Found this in the barn, he said. Thought you should see it? She opened the box carefully. Inside lay a worn map, drawn in fading ink, filled with strange markings across the west fields. There were symbols she didn't recognize, lines showing old paths, and a circle marking something near a cluster of rocks. "What is this?" she whispered. "Proof," Ryland said. "Proof of what lies under the land. Proof of why they want it so badly." Her fingers trembled as she traced the markings. The weight of the conflict grew heavier in her chest. This wasn't just a fight over a farm. It was a fight over a legacy, over secrets buried deeper than soil. Ryland lowered his voice. "Crowder isn't going to wait for Thorn to die. He's going to push. Hard. And he's going to start soon." Leora looked up. "Why warn me?" "Because," Ryland said, meeting her gaze, "you're already part of it. Whether you want to be or not." She closed the map slowly. Feeling the truth settle like a stone inside her, outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the far-off sound of horses somewhere beyond the tree line. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Riders, moving slowly. Watching the house, Ryland heard it too. He reached for his rifle, his eyes dark. "They're testing us again," he said. "Trying to see how well we're paying attention." Leora felt her heartbeat rise sharply. "What do we do?" Ryland stepped toward the door, muscles tensed. "We stay awake." The farmhouse darkened as the fire dimmed. The night pressed harder against the windows, and somewhere out in the darkness, unseen eyes searched for weakness. Leora wrapped her arms around herself. Staring into the shadows beyond the sports porch, the danger wasn't waiting anymore. It was already moving toward them. The night settled, thick around the farmhouse. A heavy blanket of darkness pressing against every window. Leora sat near the fire, her ears tuned to every distant sound. Ryland stood by the door with the rifle leaning against his arm, his eyes never leaving the black space beyond the porch. The feeling of being watched was no longer a passing thought. It clung to the air like a chill that refused to lift. Thorn hadn't come back out of his room since she helped him inside. She wanted to check on him, but something told her that stepping away from the front room now wasn't wise. The danger outside kept building, pressing in closer with each hour. The fire crackled softly. The clock on the wall ticked with slow, steady beats that reminded Leora how the night wasn't moving fast enough. If Crowder's men were out there, they weren't hiding anymore. They were circling, testing, waiting for fear to weaken the walls. Ryland turned his head slightly. "You hear that?" Leora listened. At first, she heard only the wind brushing through the open fields. Then she caught something else. A faint thud. Another. Not footsteps exactly. More like a shovel or something heavy hitting the soil. "What are they doing?" she whispered. Ryland's jaw tightened. "Digging. They're trying to find the marker from the map." Her heart thudded sharply. But the map was hidden. How would they know? "They've been after this land for decades," he said. "They know every story passed around the valley. And they know your arrival means Thorn might be trying to protect something. That alone tells them where to look." Leora grabbed the edge of the table. "So they're trying to get to the OR before anything changes. That's exactly what they're doing." Another heavy thud echoed across the yard. Leora moved to the window cautiously and pulled the curtain just enough to peek out. The moonlight exposed shapes in the field, several figures in dark coats bent over the ground with tools. Her breath caught. "There's at least 4 of them." Ryland came up behind her. "Crowder never comes alone." "Is he out there?" Ryland nodded. "He's the one holding the lantern." Leora looked again. A tall man stood behind the others, arms folded, shoulders wide, and posture cold as stone. His lantern cast a harsh glow across the ground, making the shadows stretch into twisted shapes. Even from a distance, she could feel something unsettling in his presence. A kind of cruelty that didn't need words. Ryland lowered the curtain gently. "He won't stop. Not unless something forces him to." Leora's pulse raced. "Should we call the sheriff?" Ryland shook his head. "Crowder owns half the law in this county. If anyone comes, it'll be to help him, not us." The truth stung her. This wasn't a battle fought with rules or fairness. This was land, legacy, greed, and desperation all tangled together. Ryland stepped back to grab the rifle. We need to check the back of the house. Make sure they aren't trying to corner us." Leora followed, though fear pinned itself against her ribs. They moved through the kitchen, past the quiet stillness of the pantry, and into the narrow hallway leading to the back door. The cold breeze slipped under the frame, chilling the room. Rylan opened the door slowly, keeping the barrel aimed outward. The yard was empty, but the movements in the field echoed faintly around them. "They're focused on digging." "For now," he said. "But when they don't find what they're looking for, they'll shift their attention." Leora knew exactly what that meant. The farmhouse Thorn. The marriage. She looked back toward the hallway, toward the door where Thorn was resting. "He's too weak to move," she whispered. "If they come here tonight, ... Rylan put a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "We won't let them inside." She knew he meant it. But she also knew the men outside were not the kind who turned away easily. They went back into the main room, and Rylan began checking the rifle, loading it with slow, hard clicks. Leora sat down again, though she couldn't keep still for long. The fire's glow shimmered across her face, but it couldn't warm her. Her mind kept thinking of the land Thorn wanted her to inherit, the danger tied to it, and the decision she still didn't know how to make. Another noise hit the window. This time it wasn't a thud from digging. It was a tap, a deliberate tap. Rylan snapped around. Leora froze, staring at the glass. She saw a movement outside, a shadow shifting left to right. Then a voice rose from outside, deep and cold. "You're running out of time, Thorn." The words seeped into the room like poison. Rylan moved to the window again and pulled the curtain aside with a sharp movement. Leora saw Crowder standing in the yard now, closer than before. Lantern held high. Crowder smirked when he saw Rylan. "Didn't know you were back in the valley," he said, voice steady. "Guess the old man found someone to hide behind." Rylan didn't respond. His grip on the rifle tightened. Crowder stepped forward. "I'm not interested in dragging this out. The land is mine. And the clock says, your old friend, there won't be around much longer. I'd like to settle this before he..." Drops. Leora felt something hot rise in her chest. Anger, fear, disgust. Crowder turned his gaze toward the window where she stood partly behind Rylan. His eyes narrowed with a slow, cruel smile. "So this must be the girl," he said. "The one he brought in to make trouble." Leora's breath hitched. The look in Crowder's eyes wasn't just hateful, it was calculating. Rylan stepped fully in front of her. "You're not coming near this house." Crowder chuckled softly. "You can guard him all you want, but when the heart stops beating, the land changes hands. That's the law. That's not what he promised." Leora shot back before she could stop herself. Crowder's gaze hardened. "Promised you, did he?" The malice in his voice made her regret speaking, but she didn't step back. Crowder lifted the lantern to his own face. "You don't know what you've walked into, girl. That land carries blood. Hard, ugly blood. And you don't have the spine to hold it." Rylan opened the door just enough to speak clearly. "Leave now." Crowder smiled again. "You want a war with men who don't sleep? Be my guest." He stepped back, but as he did, he raised a finger and pointed toward the west fields. Leora followed his gesture. The digging had stopped. The men were headed for the barn. Rylan's face changed instantly. "They're going after the map. They're trying to find proof." Crowder let out a low laugh. "You can hold a rifle, but you can't guard everything." He walked away slowly, disappearing into the darkness with a confidence that chilled Leora to the bone. Rylan shut the door hard and locked it. "We need to get to the barn before they break in." Leora nodded but grabbed his arm. "Thorn can't stay alone." Rylan hesitated, torn between both dangers. "We can't move him. Not in his state." "I'll stay with him," she said. "You go to the barn." Rylan looked at her, testing her strength in that moment. "If they come to the house, ... I won't open the door." He nodded once quickly, then rushed out the back door toward the barn. Leora exhaled shakily and hurried down the hall to check on Thorn. He was sitting up on the edge of the bed, breathing hard but alert. "I heard," he said. She moved to him quickly. "Crowder and his men are trying to force their way in. Rylan's outside trying to stop them." Thorn placed his hand over hers. You shouldn't be in the middle of this. Ah! Her voice trembled. I'm already in it. He looked at her with a slow, heavy sadness. I didn't want you to inherit a war. Before she could answer, another noise rattled the house. Something slammed against the front door. Thorn tried to stand, but she pressed him back gently. Stay here. I'll see what's happening. She rushed into the hallway just as another blow hit the door, harder this time. The wood shook in its frame. Leora grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, and held it tight. Her heart pounded wildly. Rylan, she whispered, hoping he was close, but the knight answered with another strike. And this time, the door cracked. The farmhouse trembled. Leora raised the iron poker. Her breath coming fast. The danger wasn't approaching. Anymore, it was already at the door. The door shook again with a violent crack that echoed through the whole farmhouse. Leora tightened her grip on the iron poker, her breath rising and falling in quick waves. She didn't know if the next hit would send the door crashing inward, but she planted her feet firm like the old floorboards were part of her spine. Thorn tried calling from his room, but she didn't turn. She needed every bit of focus for whoever stood on the other side. Another strike. Came harder. The wood splintered at the edges. Then, a loud whistle cut through the air. Outside, sharp, piercing, and instantly followed by shouting. Leora heard heavy footsteps running away from the porch. The shaking stopped. Silence spread for a moment before she heard the unmistakable sound of someone sprinting toward the front steps. The door swung slightly inward, and Rylan burst inside, breathing fast. His hair was wild from the wind, and his hands were scraped from whatever fight he had outside. They're gone, he said, trying to catch his breath. At least for now. I scared them off before they could break through. Leora felt her knees soften from relief, and she lowered the poker, letting the tension slip from her arms. What about the barn? Did they take anything? Nothing, Rylan said. They tried to break the door there too, but I fired a warning shot. They scattered. Is Crowder with them? He was, Rylan said, wiping dirt from his cheek. But he's long gone now. He didn't want a real fight tonight. Leora exhaled, her whole body shaking from the rush of fear and relief. He'll come back. Rylan nodded. Yes, but not tonight. She glanced down the hall toward Thorn's room. He heard everything. I need to check on him. Rylan followed her, stepping carefully to avoid waking the house more than it already was. When they reached the room, Thorn was sitting up with the blanket pulled around his shoulders. His eyes were clearer now, though the exhaustion beneath them was deep. You didn't open that door, Thorn said, looking at Leora with a pride that softened his face. You stood your ground. She smiled faintly. Because this place is worth standing for. Rylan leaned against the wall. Crowder's not giving up. He's too stubborn to walk away from the ore under the land. Thorn took a slow breath. He won't have to give up. Because the ore isn't there anymore. Leora blinked. What do you mean? Thorn motioned for them to sit. Before my father died, he worked that west field with tools and a quiet determination. He found enough ore to survive on, but not enough to make him rich. And he stopped digging once he realized the land couldn't take any more tearing apart. The vein he found dried out long before I took over. Crowder and his brothers spent years fighting for a ghost. Rylan's eyes widened slightly. You never told anyone that? Why would I? Thorn answered. If I said there was nothing left, they would have called me a liar. They would have dug anyway, turned the land inside out. Better they kept believing the story than destroying the farm for a rumor. Leora felt something powerful rise in her chest. All this danger, all this tension, all these years of fear came from a treasure that didn't exist anymore. A secret that held more strength than gold ever could, so they're chasing something that isn't there. She said. Thorn nodded. And they'll keep chasing until someone shows them the truth. Rylan paced the room. If they find out the ore is gone, they'll turn all that anger on you. Blame you for wasting their time. Thorn's voice grew steady. That's where I need both of you. Not to fight Crowder. Not with guns or threats. But to show the town what this place really is. A home, a working farm, a land built on sweat, not silver. Leora felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just a visitor anymore. She had become part of this farm, its nights, its fears, its heartbeat. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Thorn smiled gently. "Live here. Work here. Show them I didn't bring you to hide anything. Show them this land will continue as a real farm, not a battlefield." Rylan paused. "Crowder won't take that well. He'll have to," Thorn said, "because my time is running short. And someone needs to lead this place when I'm gone." Leora felt her breath catch at the truth she'd tried not to think about. "I'm still not sure I understand why me." Thorn looked at her with a deep, quiet honesty. "Because you came here without asking for more than a place to rest. Because I saw strength in you the moment you stepped onto my porch. And because I know you won't let fear decide your path." Her throat tightened with emotion. She didn't know how one old farmer saw so much in her so quickly, but she knew she couldn't walk away now. A sudden knock echoed from the doorway, soft and careful. All three turned. Leora's heart jumped until she saw who it was. One of the neighbors stood there. Wyatt, a man with a strong frame and kind eyes. "Saw lights out on the west field," he said. "Wanted to check if everything was all right." Rylan stepped forward. Crowder's men were digging, looking for the old vein. Wyatt shook his head with a low sigh. "That man will chase shadows until the sun burns out." Leora stepped closer. "Thorn says the ore is gone. Has been gone for years." Wyatt's eyebrows rose. "Well, that's the truth. My father used to talk about that vein drying up long before any of us were grown. Crowder should have known better." Thorn leaned back against the pillows. He knew. He just didn't want to accept it. Wyatt looked around the room and then back at Leora. "If you plan to stay here, miss, the valley folk should hear it from you. That way no one can twist the story." Leora nodded slowly. "I'll tell them." That decision opened something inside her, a path she didn't expect but felt right in her bones. The next morning, after a long night of guarding the farm, Rylan saddled the horses and rode down to the town with Leora beside him. They met with the neighbors, the shopkeepers, and the ranchers who respected Thorn. She told them the truth, her voice steady even when fear nudged her ribs. Many already suspected the OR was gone. Others only needed to hear it from someone who stood with Thorn in his final months. By afternoon, word had spread across the valley. Crowder's anger lit the town like wildfire. But with every neighbor standing against him, his voice carried less and less weight. He stormed into the saloon, shouting about betrayal and stolen land, but no one backed him. Not when they learned the truth. Not when they saw that Thorn's choice had nothing to do with greed and everything to do with protecting the land from destruction by evening. Crowder loaded his wagon and left the valley under a storm of his own bitterness. His brothers followed days later, their threats fading like dust behind them. When Leora and Rylan returned to the farm, Thorn was sitting on the porch bundled in a blanket, watching the sun set over the fields. "You handled it," Thorn said, his voice soft. "Because you trusted me," Leora answered. Rylan stood beside her. "Crowder won't be back. The valley made sure of it." Thorn closed his eyes briefly, as if letting go of a weight he had carried for decades. "Good, then the land can breathe again." Leora sat beside him. "And you?" "I can rest now," Thorn said. "Knowing this place will live past me." Over the next weeks, the air around the farm changed. The fear lifted. The fields seemed brighter. The wind felt calmer. Thorn grew weaker, but his eyes carried a quiet peace that softened the lines of age across his face. Before his final day came, he asked Leora and Rylan to sit with him. His voice was thin, but his words steady. "You both belong here," he said. "Together, protect this land the way I did, but build more joy into it. Don't let it be shaped only by battles." Leora held his hand until it grew still. The valley gathered to honor him with a small, heartfelt goodbye. Rylan stood beside her, his presence steady and loyal, and when the service ended, the townsfolk returned to the fields, knowing the valley had new guardians now. In the months that followed, Leora stayed on the land she had once known only as a job. Rylan helped rebuild the barn doors, repair the fences, and restore peace to the west fields. Together they worked the soil, planted new seeds, welcomed neighbors, and built the kind of life Thorn would have wanted. Word spread across the valley that the farm had a new heartbeat, strong and hopeful, a place where the land grew life again, not fear. Leora would often stand on the porch at sunset, watching the sky turn gold over the fields. She felt the wind brush her hair and knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The old farmer had given her more than land. He had given her a home, and in that home she found safety, purpose, and a future filled with a quiet, enduring happiness.